Hey, it's Mr. Shrum. Welcome. How are you guys doing? I am going through the relationships in ecosystem tutorial, and we are on the lesson activity. I noticed some people were stopping at this point in the tutorial before moving on, or they just got lost and whatnot. But I'll walk you through it, kind of give you some background and context as to why the answers are the way they are. And in this Chesapeake Bay Waterbirds activity, we're going to practice making and defending claims based on evidence about the natural world. And we're going to develop a model. We're always developing models to communicate our ideas and complex concepts to each other in science. And that makes it easier for us to solve problems. So here we go. We have the Chesapeake Bay Waterbird food web. And this is a visualization of how the species within this ecosystem feed on one another. And in part A, we're asked to draw a trophic pyramid using the animals in this Chesapeake Bay ecosystem and including the percentage of energy at each level. And that is from this lesson. And I'll show you that in a bit. And then in this drawing, we're going to include the names of the species for each level, each trophic level. And if we look at this food web, you can broadly see the levels starting here with the vegetation, the aquatic vegetation, submerged aquatic vegetation, abbreviated SAV, phytoplankton. So these guys, there's no arrow below them. So that indicates that's where the food web starts. So we start at the phytoplankton, SAV, in vegetation, and then you see what consumes that by going up these arrows. Phytoplankton is consumed by zooplankton, small planktivorous fish, invertebrates. SAV is consumed by omnivorous ducks. Vegetation is consumed by geese and mute swans and another type of swan called the tundra swan. All right, so we have this level and then the level directly above that. And then we see who eats the level above that. It's just a chain. Think of it as a chain starting at the very small level of phytoplankton and vegetation all the way up to the predators known as the bald eagle and the osprey in this specific ecosystem. And if we go to the answer key, this is the pyramid and the corresponding percentage of energy, the corresponding percentage of energy at each level. And we see at the very bottom, we have the producers, all that phytoplankton, vegetation, and 100% of the energy is at that level. And as you go up each trophic level, notice that the efficiency of drawing energy from the lower levels is 1/10 as efficient. So we have 100% of the energy at the producers, but the primary consumers, they consume and they're only able to use about 10% of that initial energy. Producers, primary consumers, and in this group, we have zooplankton, the benthic invertebrates, bivalves, geese, and then mute swans. And above that, we have animals and other species consuming those primary consumers. And they only take a tenth of that energy. So that the energy level at that level is 1%. So we went from 100% to 10% to 1%. And we're only at the secondary consumer level, including omnivorous ducks and small fish. And then the level above that is tertiary, primary, secondary, and then tertiary consumers. We have gulls, terns, other types of birds, larger fish, sea ducks, and then another type of swan. And the energy level at that level is 1/10 of 1%, or 0.1%. And then we get the quaternary consumers, or the generally called the predators. These are the osprey and the bald eagle, and they have the most inefficient energy consumption level. They're only getting about 0.01% of the energy initially produced by the phytoplankton, SAV, and vegetation. Moving on to part B, assume that 357,250,000 kilocalories are available at the producer level in this Chesapeake Bay ecosystem. Calculate the amount of usable chemical energy available at each level in the pyramid. Show your work. And all we are doing is dividing by 10. And we'll see that here. We're at 10%. So you're multiplying by 10 over 100. If you're initially starting out with 100% of energy, and that 100% is 357,250,000 kilocalories, 10% of that is 35,725,000 kilocalories of energy. That will be available for that first level of consumers. And at the next level, you take 10% of that number. So we multiply that by 10 over 100. That leaves you with 3,572,500 kilocalories of energy. For tertiary consumer, you multiply by 10% again. You're left with 357,250 kilocalories. And for the quaternary consumers, you have 357,250 times 10 over 100, resulting in only 35,725 kilocalories of energy available for the fourth level consumers. So that's a big difference between 350 million plus to 35,000, okay? 10% and 10% of that, and then 10% of that, and then 10% of that is transferred to the next level. What weaknesses exist in your trophic pyramid diagram, and what processes or organisms are not shown? So now we're thinking about, okay, so this is a decent model, but what is it not able to tell us? What are some of the weaknesses? Well, one, it doesn't show that the chemical energy becomes heat energy for the organisms. It also doesn't show decomposers. And these decomposers work to break down dead organisms in the ecosystem. They play another vital role in the circle of life. So those are some of the biggest weaknesses here for the food web. And in part D, a disease caused the population of small planktivorous fish in the region to sharply decline. How will this situation affect the competition for food in the region? Consider direct and indirect effects. So, any change in one population in an ecosystem can have devastating effects, or it will just shift the whole um, vibe, if you will, or the whole system entirely. And that can be either directly, as in a food source is gone for someone, so they have to find another source of food, or they will likely die over time. And the examples here, we have the zooplankton population may rise because the small planktivorous fish eat them for food. So if you remove a population's predator, that population will grow. There also may be more phytoplankton for bivalves and small invertebrates because there will be a little less competition for these food resources from these small planktivorous fish. But gulls, terns, large fish, and the wading birds will have much more competition for food because that is one of their main sources of food. If we go back to the food web, we're talking about this small planktivorous fish. Zooplankton, phytoplankton is consumed by this small fish, and then this small fish is consumed by the gulls, the wading birds, and the larger piscivorous fish. And if these are affected, if this is affected, then these guys are certainly affected. And then indirectly, the osprey is also affected, and the bald eagle's food source as well. So you see this ripple effect when you mess with one of the populations, or one of the populations suddenly gets larger or smaller. It has a large impact on the ecosystem. The competition between the gulls, terns, large fish can indirectly affect the food supply for those large carnivorous birds, like we said, such as the eagle and the osprey. If the large fish don't have enough food to survive, their populations may also decline, which will decrease the food supply for these larger carnivores. And the main point of this exercise is to be able to look at this food web, understand how the players interact, and then be able to make and defend your claims by describing and communicating what this food web says, and understand that this model can help us analyze the ecosystem and solve issues, solve problems, but also be able to critique this certain model, as in we don't get to see the decomposers, and it doesn't show all of the forms of energy that this chemical energy is changing into. So those are some of the main points you should pick up from this tutorial. And the other lesson activity that was actually holding up some people was the humans and honey guides. And this one deals with reading about scientific information in text form, construct or revise a scientific explanation based on reliable evidence obtained from an experiment. Okay, so we have this article here called Humans, Birds Communicate to Collaborate. And then we're going to answer some of these questions. Okay, so this article by Bruce Bauer when asked the right way, a savvy bird species steers African hunter-gatherers to honey. All it takes is a loud trill followed by a grunt that sounds like "Urr." I hope I did that justice. Um, Birds known as greater honey guides, indicator, lead hunter-gatherers in Mozambique to honey-rich bees' nests after hearing humans make this signature call. Say evolutionary ecologist Claire Spottiswoode of the University of Cambridge and her colleagues. In exchange, the birds get human-aided access to perilous to reach food. The scientists report in the July 22nd Science. The new study provides the first solid evidence of two-way collaborative communication between humans and a non-human animal in the wild. In some parts of the world, dolphins help fishermen herd fish into nets. But it's unclear whether these dolphins respond to specific calls from fishermen. So they may just be doing this without any direct communication from the humans. Honey guides associate Yao hunter-gatherers' distinct honey hunting call with successful joint food hunts, Spottiswoode says. The birds respond to this call by making a loud chattering sound to alert humans to their presence. Honey guides then fly from tree to tree until reaching one with a bee's nest. Although the wax-eating birds regularly scope out locations of bees' nests in their home ranges, getting beeswax out of nests is dangerous. Angry bees can and do sting honey guides to death, Spottiswoode says. Yao honey hunters cut down trees containing bees' nests nestled high up in crevices and smoke the insects out with flaming bundles of twigs and leaves. After removing honeycombs from nests, the Yao leave beeswax behind for their avian helpers and even put wax chunks on beds of leaves to reward honey guides. Written accounts of honey guide-led expedition to bees' nests date as early as 1588, so 400, 500 plus years ago. But an axe-like stone implements and human-made fires date to 1 million years ago or more. So humans and honey guides may have hunted together for at least that long, says Harvard University biological anthropologist Richard Wrangham. In different parts of Africa, honey guides respond to local honey hunting calls of human groups. The researcher suspects. A team led by Yale University biological anthropologist Brian Wood has found that Hadza honey hunters in Tanzania make a whistling sound to attract honey guides. Other hunter-gatherers speak or shout words to call honey guides, Wood says. Unlike Yao honey hunters, the Hadza bury or burn much of the wax in bees' nests. These honey seekers believe this keeps honey guides hungry and motivates them to lead further hunts. Wood's team estimates that 8 to 10% of the Hadza's diet comes from honey guide-led hunts. The new study carefully documents one cultural tradition in how people and honey guide interact, Wood says. Spottiswoode's group conducted fieldwork in October 2013 and September and October of 2015. The researchers tracked movements of 6 honey guides fitted with radio transmitters. They put radio transmitters on these birds, and overall, 73 of 97 bird-led honey hunts found at least one bee's nest. During the study, nearly 3/4 of 149 bees' nests found by the Yao involved honey guide assistants. In another experiment, Spottiswoode accompanied 2 Yao honey hunters on 72 searches for bees' nests, each lasting 15 minutes. While he walked, a portable speaker played recordings every 7 seconds, either of a Yao honey hunter making the sound, a Yao individual saying words such as honey guide or their own name, or a ring-necked dove song or excitement call. Honey guides joined 30 experimental searches. About 2/3 of searches that featured Burham calls drew honey guides assistants, although they did not always locate a bee's nest. 1/4 of hunts that used recordings of words and 1/3 of those that played dove sounds received honey guide help. Spottiswood's team calculates that honey hunters who played the Burham sound more than tripled their chances of actually finding a bee's nest during 15-minute searches, compared with honey hunters who played Yao words or dove sounds. Spottiswood and Wood plan to investigate whether young honey guides learn from adult birds to pay attention to humans' honey hunting calls and to lead humans to bees' nests. All right. So, fun little article. There's one of them. And then we'll go back to the activity. Part A. What type of relationship do humans and honey guides have? Well, as we saw in the article, this is a mutualistic relationship, as in they both benefit from this endeavor. Humans find honey much faster using the birds as guides, and the birds avoid being stung by bees. So a mutualistic relationship is a win-win, and this is a case of win-win. Why do you think it can be difficult for scientists to determine whether an apparent relationship between species is an example of symbiosis? Use evidence from the article to support your answer. The nature of the relationship isn't always clear. For example, dolphins help people fish, but it's not clear whether the dolphins respond to calls. This situation can make it difficult to determine whether the relationship is mutualistic or commensal. And commensal, if you guys need a little refresher, we'll use Merriam-Webster. And this is a relationship between two kinds of organisms in which one obtains food or other benefits from the other without damaging or benefiting it. So that's not so much a win-win. That's, let's get out of the ads. That's not so much a win-win as one wins and one neither wins nor loses, right? So mutualistic is a win-win, commensal is not. Be sure to be able to make that distinction. Choose one of the studies mentioned in the article. What was the researcher's hypothesis? How did they test their hypothesis? Well, the hypothesis was that the honey guide responded specifically to the human's sound and not just the human voices. They tested this hypothesis by performing several different calls and then monitoring those calls and seeing which calls caused the birds to respond. And hypotheses have to be testable. A hypothesis tries to explain in a logical way and using observation why something occurs, and then you have to be able to test it. And that makes a hypothesis a hypothesis. Part D says list 3 questions about the human honey guide symbiosis that could be answered with further research. Do honey guides in different areas of the word have a similar symbiosis with humans? That's a good one. Is this a regional affair or is it common across the world? How old are the birds when they learn to respond to the humans' calls? Is this a case of young birds growing up around humans and finding that relationship to be beneficial? Is it more instinctual? Could other birds in the region form a similar symbiosis with humans? Can birds provide value to humans and benefit in some way like these honey guides? Those are some really good example questions. And then as a closer, maybe an optimistic closure for the self-evaluation, how did you do? And then which lesson activity gave you the most trouble? Were you better at looking at a model, gathering information from that, and then talking about it? Or is it harder to read a long text and then piece together the information and evidence that way? Ideally, we should be getting better at both, being able to look at a visual, communicate ideas, and piece together the information. And we should be getting better at reading these longer texts, identifying key information, and then communicating those ideas to one another verbally, or in this case, written form. But those are the two things I want you all to pay attention to and see if you're getting better week to week. And that is it for this lesson. And if you have any more questions, message me in Canvas, come to office hours or one-on-one tutoring, and I will be able to help you out in lots of ways. Anywho, it was good to see you all again, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.